Wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Thank you, Joe, for having me here.
You bet. So before we get into your work, before we get into your world, 5 years ago, this pandemic was changing our lives, changing
Mhm.
so many things about the way we lived. How did you get through that era, and how did it change the way that you do things today?
Yeah, well, actually, I remember I was a junior in high school when that happened. So I know all of us were like, at first, we got 2 weeks off and we were like, oh, this is so great. And we can stay home and not do anything. And then it kind of started to sink in that this was actually like going to persist for a while. And I think none of us were really ready for that mentally. But I do think it was just, I mean, it was kind of nice. I was taking a lot of AP classes, so those were all online. But it was funny because to get us not to cheat on the AP exams, they would post like wrong answers, the AP tests online. And so if you look them up and use those, then they would auto score you like a 0 or 1 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of initially what I think of, but I think it honestly really worked to my advantage. I did a digital marketing internship soon after, which was actually based in California. And I was able to do that work after school from 4 to 8 because that's their 1 to 5.
Yeah.
So I actually was able to get a job out of that. But yeah, I know it was such a difficult time for everybody.
So if you were to be in front of a bunch of 12-year-olds at a school and it's career day, and one of the kids wanted to know what you do right now for a living, what your work is, what you do, how do you answer that child?
Yeah, so right now, I guess I'm getting a master's degree. So I haven't really started, I guess, my full-time job, but I do data analytics. I signed for Capital One, which is a great company, to do business analytics for them. And for that, it's just kind of looking at their business data and providing insights to better advance their marketing or business strategies overall. I think it's really interesting because I can kind of pick and choose what projects I want to work on, which
Yeah.
is really nice to have some sort of independence and no one really micromanages you. So I kind of get to choose, my own pace, what I want to look into. And I do think that's really nice. And then on the side, I do podcasting. So I do have a corporate podcast to talk about how this new generation can adjust to corporate life because it is a massive change and a lot more people are going into corporate compared to previous generations. So how do we adjust? How do we adapt to that is kind of my niche right now.
So it's when you look at what you want to do with your career, if you were to look 10 years into the future, where do you want to be? What kind of job do you want to have?
I think to be honest, 10 years in the future, I really want to work for myself. I think that's my ultimate goal. I'm really passionate about a lot of things, but I think when someone tells me how to do something, I kind of lose passion for that. And I've noticed that with school as well. Like I'm passionate about certain topics, but then when I go into a class, it's not as fun as I expected or as applicable to the real world, especially in engineering. You learn a lot of theory, but maybe you don't get to apply it. And I think that's kind of where I really want my own business or my own work to kind of step in. I'm not entirely sure what that's going to be yet. But yeah, we'll see where that goes.
It's interesting to see the evolution of generations. Like I come from Generation X, and the big thing with us was we really wanted to travel. We didn't want to get hairpinned into a career position that was going to make us miserable. We saw all that kind of fuselage from like the 50s and 60s. Our parents were in that, the greatest generation kind of a thing, a baby boomer, so to speak. The interesting thing about Z is that your podcast is about getting into corporate, but ultimately you want to get and work for yourself. And that's the beat I get from the Z generation. They don't want to get, painted into a corner. They want to do what they want to do. They want to have that freedom. So it's an interesting juxtaposition you have between corporate crash out and wanting to ultimately in 10 years have your own gig. How do those two worlds come together for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's funny because my dad's like, okay, well, you're talking about corporate on a podcast, and if you really, eventually don't want a corporate job, how does that even align? But I think for me, it's like how do you transition first like into corporate? How do you get enough savings? And then how do you figure out what your passion actually is?
Yeah.
Because usually it's not going to be some position that's already been lined out for you that they just need someone to fill. Everyone's unique and has their own personal interests, and that's not always going to be expressed in the corporate world. So, how do you kind of find out what your passion is? And I think, maybe there is that corporate at first, but we all have to make money somehow. And
Yep.
so, how do you transition yourself from corporate, if that's something you no longer want to do, into creating your own business? I think would be really interesting. And you're definitely right when you talk about, Gen Z and their passion for wanting to own their own businesses. I feel like everyone I talk to these days in my generation is that's like the ultimate goal is to work for yourself, work for
Yep.
yourself. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting.
What you're saying makes total sense because you gotta stockpile this experience collateral and you have to
Mhm.
stockpile some level of wealth to get to that point. And it almost seems like if you do go into that corporate environment, it's almost like on the job training you're getting paid for. Because all of these things that you're learning on the job, you're going to take and become an entrepreneur with those skills. You
Mhm.
can't just automatically have all of these skills. You have to go into a place and then, like you said, you have to find your path. What's been kind of from your your listener base, what kind of responses are you getting? What kind of feedback are you getting? What's kind of the general feel of what you're putting out there now?
I mean, I think right now we're going pretty small, just people at our like university listening to it, and things like that. But I think overall people really like it. We talk about what to wear in corporate environments and how to dress and how to talk, how to, interview and things like that, which are all just essential skills these days. Like I know my parents, they, printed out their resume and handed it, like went into the office of the building they wanted to work at and handed it to somebody.
Yeah.
And that no longer, I go to the career fair, I hand someone my resume at a career fair and they just throw it in the trash and or they won't even accept it. And so to me, I realized, something has to change with that. And I guess that's kind of, sorry, I forgot your question.
No,
Let's get
no, I was
talking.
just kind of talking about the reception from your audience, but you're true. You're right. Like I have my stepdaughter's 19 and she's got a job now that she's into that's going to give her some lateral movement in the company. But I've always thought that was where we came from. If it got to a point where we didn't get a response, or we really wanted a response, we would go in with paper. And it's interesting you're saying they don't even want to have that. So it's really all digital. It's like the paperless
Mhm.
currency and commerce that we're living in right now. People don't want it in physical form. So you got to be creative with the way that you transmute it digitally.
Yeah, and the whole other issue with that too, and I guess this is also what our, our listeners like listening to because it's a whole game, honestly. I mean, you have to apply to a sophomore year. I guess I applied to 200 companies to get an internship.
Hmm.
And that's obviously a lot of work. And then for each place you apply to, you can't have the same resume.
Yeah.
So we also get taught this in business school. You have to have multiple versions. And then you have to kind of use an artificial intelligence to scan it and match it to your job description that you're applying for. And then that's why they don't want to accept paper now, is because everything is scanned through artificial intelligence on there
Yeah.
as well to see, if we can shortlist the best applicants so we don't have to read all these resumes. And so that's kind of the process you're dealing with now, which I think, our listeners can relate to a lot. And the advice from our parents really isn't current. I mean, some of it is, how to dress for an interview and things like that. But at the same time, there's so much that has changed. And it is really hard for a lot of people who don't have experience or know other people who are a little bit older than them, like just by a few years, to tell them how this process works because it is confusing and it is complicated.
It's weird. I think about our generation, the Gen Xers, the one of the catchphrases was just keeping it real, keeping it real. And now it's a whole different meaning because what's real and what's not, what's AI, what's real. You know what I'm saying? Like the
Yeah.
fact that we've gotten to that human point in our civilization where we have to literally be like, is that painting real? Is that song real? There's an actress in Hollywood now, Polly something, that is becoming like Yeah, it's weird. Like a lot of actors are talking about it at award ceremonies. They have made an AI woman that is going to be a lead actress in a movie, and Hollywood's livid because it's going to take away work from humans. So
Yeah.
these are the things that are popping up. So I would imagine looking for jobs and vetting, someone could go in and catfish via AI and try to
Hmm.
get in, right? I mean, it's just
Yeah.
a part of the world now.
No, that's 100% true. And also with these big firms, especially in like investment banking or wealth management funds, you'll find that the first round interview is online. So it's not even with a real person. It's actually just you talking to nobody else. They give you a question and they record it, and then people like watch it. But it's really just an artificial intelligence scanning how well you answer it. And
Wow.
then, and then what other people though have done is then they download software on their computer that tells them how to answer the questions that it's given them. And so they just kind of like read off of their computer screen the answers. And then, it's this whole game and it's just kind of getting more and more messy. So it's really interesting to see it develop. So,
I've talked to AI pioneers and I'm like, what's the biggest issue with AI? And it's when AI feeds off of each other. And that's exactly what you just explained.
mhm.
You got AI analyzing AI, and it's the snake eating its own tail. And that's where it creates this weird like loop because at the end of the day, AI is not a sentient being. It's basically a bunch of very sophisticated zeros and ones. So if it starts analyzing itself, it's going to create this weird scenario, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you also get that problem in academia as well and in education because, a lot of people use artificial intelligence for their papers with Gen AI. And
Uh-huh.
then you have teachers scanning it with, Turnitin or some other kind of software that scans for that artificial intelligence. So what some people will do is they'll create a paper through ChatGPT, for example. Then they'll put it through another artificial intelligence. So that way, when the teacher scans with their artificial intelligence, it won't read the same. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like this huge like cat and mouse game. um, and so I can definitely see that getting really messy and just overall just inefficient, obviously, because it's a lot of wasted resources just going back and forth.
So it's really about finding the most human AI out there. It's going to be the battle of AIs. What a weird world. So let me ask you this. When you were 12 years old and you were in that classroom at Career Day, what was your dream job? What was your dream life? What did you want to do then?
Honestly, I really didn't know. I knew I really liked science at the time, and so I wanted to do something towards that. But I think as I grew up, I also started to like econ a lot, and I had some great professors that taught me a lot with like Freakonomics, if you read the book for
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought that was just the coolest thing. And so I knew when I got into college, I was like, well, I can't choose. I can't choose between science or business. And I was like, I need to find a college that lets me double major. And I went around to all these colleges. Like I went to UPenn, I went to, I don't know, just UVA, UNC. And it was so hard to double major. I was like, why is it this hard to double major in 4 years? And they were like, well, you can in 5 years. And I was like, no, I want to pay for 4 years of college and I want to double major in two different things. And so WashU was the one that really just allows for you to do that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to start primary in business and then I'm going to get another degree in cognitive neuroscience because I also really like the brain and that's kind of where I wanted to go scientifically. And so that's kind of what I ended up doing. And then from there, I was like, I worked in a lot of neuroscience labs and I was like, okay, this is so slow. Like you sit there and you wait for the monkeys to learn something and then you test them again and then you wait them. It was so slow. And I was like, okay, this probably isn't for me. Then I decided in business that I really liked data analytics, but they didn't have that as a major. So I said, okay, like the closest thing I guess is finance, and it gives me the most flexibility. So I majored in finance and I did a bunch of internships there, but I hated the internships in finance. But I realized what kind of combines both of those fields is data. I
Yeah.
mean, in business, you have to look at tons and tons of data to understand your customers, to understand the market, to understand, your competitors. And I think with neuroscience, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of like a business in a way to me because all the different parts of the brain have to work together to achieve one thing, one like a few great outputs. And so that's kind of how I looked at it, and all with data. You figure out what the brain is doing and how to improve it, right? And so to me, that's kind of how I ended up where I am. But
Yeah.
that's a really long-winded answer to your
No,
question.
no, that's good. And I was going to follow that up by when you were really young, what were these foundational elements of like empirical data, scientifically going for things, business? What were those elements of fascination that made you want to get in to major in this and become your career? And even being an entrepreneur, how did all of that kind of take hold, this hybrid of corporate and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, no, I think it's so interesting you're asking about when I was young, because I do, when people are like, I'm not passionate about anything, I don't know what to do. I'm like, what did you like when you were little? And actually, that's very indicative, I think, of what you'll end up doing. But for me, when I was younger, I think, you know, I always just was a little bit of a nerd. I liked math, but it quickly got boring for me when it wasn't word problems. I liked it in the context of something else. And so literally I remember sitting on the floor after, trick-or-treating on Halloween, and I would just make bar graphs of my candy, which I know is so lame, but I actually just really liked it. I liked seeing, okay, well, I can't visualize all my candy like this, but I can visualize it on a graph. And so I'd make the graph for myself. And I guess that's sort of how some of that manifested as well. But I think my mom also just made a lot of things really interesting. And I think that's something that's kind of lacking right now in the educational world, that, teachers are just trying to get through content, and they're told they have to get through this much content or this much whatever. Nobody's going to remember that. Sorry, but I don't remember like earth science from six. I don't, but I'll remember what I was passionate about. I'll remember what I like doing. And I think to me, that's one of the biggest things. So, teachers that inspire me the most from when I was younger are the teachers that did fun experiments and, let us look through light through a prism, and, all
Yeah.
those fun things, or like dichotomous keys with like, we did it with beans, and I still remember that. And so we would have a bunch of different beans, and it's like, how do you choose? How do you figure out which type of bean this is and use a dichotomous key? So I think it kind of all stemmed from that, from having people who are passionate teach other people who are actually passionate about something. And then, yeah, just kind of a love for math as well.
So who's been your hero? Who's been an inspirational force for you in your life?
Um, there's actually a lot. I think Stefan Steven Steph Stephen Davidowitz, which he wrote Everybody Lies, if you know that book,
Yeah.
that was really cool for me, on big data. And I don't know, I just thought that was the most interesting thing at the time, because it was such an interesting way to look at Google information online. I mean, now Google doesn't release as much about their trends. They have like Google, it used to be Google Trends, and now I forget what it is now. But I loved the way he analyzed it and just looked up interesting problems, and, dived in a little bit more into psychology and talked about why people lie, and or like what people lie about, and like maybe why. And you can start to see these patterns emerge. And I don't know, it's weird to think that, I don't know. I just thought it was like the coolest thing, because I was like, you're using data to find just an actual really interesting development. I remember one of the things he talked about in his book was that people would lie about which political candidate they chose. And so the easiest way to tell which political candidate someone was going to choose is to look at their Google search and ask them to Google both political candidates. Whoever they put first in that Google search is most likely who they're going to vote for,
Uh-huh.
which I was like mind blown. I was
Yeah.
like, that's so interesting and cool. And I would have never thought of that. I think just things that make me think differently, just like Freakonomics. Like I don't know. I just never thought
Yeah.
that, if you charge parents for leaving their kids too long at a preschool, that they would leave them more often. But you do see that because they don't feel as emotionally obligated to come back if they're already paying. So it's like, I don't know. I think it just changes my perspective and changes my view. And that's what I find is most interesting.
Yeah, the Malcolm social psychology concepts are fascinating, like the 10,000 hours to become a master. And even in Freakonomics, that was kind of the groundbreaking one, like ways that our economy will not crash, or the way, like, even back in the day, he was talking about how Clinton balanced the budget and things that they did in the welfare system and all of these different aspects that it's just fascinating. I mean, the economy, the way, like, when we've had these disasters with like the housing bubble exploding and other things happening, we hear about it as a consumer, but the economy takes so long for it to trickle down to us. Like even with the government shutdown right now, all
Yeah.
of these things that are happening, we're not going to probably really see it or feel it as a consumer for maybe another couple weeks. It just takes a while. It's kind of like a wave in the ocean. It just takes a while to mount and find us, and it's amazing how that stuff works. And Gladwell comes at it from such a fresh perspective as a human being instead of like numbers that are stale and boring. He comes at it in a very interesting way.
Yeah, I think the economy is a whole different view right now because I
Yeah.
know everyone's saying like there's an AI bubble and what does that mean? But, we see the stock market continuing to climb and climb. And so it's kind of, yeah, it's just super interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think there's also a lot of opportunity there in the marketplace. But yeah, I kind of see the direction we're going in. I see that, in finance, we said we tax high frequency trading a long time ago, and we still haven't done that. And what we're really just keep pushing people to do is to capitalize off of arbitrage in these financial markets when their value isn't even necessarily correlated to the
Yeah.
actual value of the companies. And I
Uh-huh.
think we saw that with GameStop, right? Like all these people just kept buying it. And, it's not that GameStop was actually that valuable as a company.
Right.
It was just that, people on Reddit decided everyone's going to start buying GameStop. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, I think.
Yeah, I watched that movie. They had a Netflix show on
Yeah,
that.
I haven't watched it yet.
It's just you're just like, how did this happen? It was the pandemic. It was that flurry of everything online. It's a trip. You should see it. So, if you could meet one entrepreneur alive today that you could have a lunch with, spend some time, ask some questions that would help you on your path, who would that be?
Um, I'm trying to think. To be honest, and this sounds like such a dumb answer, but I would meet with probably Kim Kardashian just because I feel like she has failed so many times
Yep.
and every time she got back up and kept doing what she was doing. And, people say, okay, she's talentless, but at the same time, it's like she has had so many different businesses. And I actually learned from her so much, which sounds, crazy, but I watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and through that, I learned about all the problems they encountered with all their businesses. They went through so many legal like lawsuits because they didn't trademark everything the right way. They didn't take the right like legal action from the beginning. And so for my podcast, for my business that I'm, building or going to build in the future, I mean, I already trademarked my podcast name. I trademarked like every division that I want to use that in so nobody else can take that. I learned about copyright laws, I think from Taylor Swift obviously, and the issues she had, and that's why she came out with Taylor's version. And I think just talking and like I don't know, I just asking Kim probably about just how she built her career and how she just kept up the motivation to keep going. And I think at one point, their whole family was in large amounts of credit card debt when they were first starting because you have to have this appearance. And this is kind of the same in investment banking and everything else these days. But like you have to have this appearance that you're already what you want to become, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. And so you have to have all these nice things. You have to have all this whatever. And then you just dive yourself into this hole because it's a lot of costs up front. And so how do you manage that? How do you get that back? How do you manage a, like emoji business or manage, an app? They had apps, like each one of them had apps. And so how do you accomplish that? How do you move into I mean, you say you're this fashion icon, but then it's at the same time, the only way to make money in fashion really is to make fashion accessible to middle income people,
Yep.
right? So you have to get a lot of people to buy, not a $2,000 purse, but maybe like a $20 purse, right? And so how do you make that profitable? And I think that actually is really interesting.
Yeah, it totally is. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, all of your listeners to your show, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a faithful, smart. I'd like to think I'm smart, passionate person. And I'll say that because I don't think a year ago I was the same in that respect because I was so focused on school. Everyone told me I had to focus on school and you have to get good grades. And when you get good grades, you'll get a good job. And I realized that that's not necessarily true. You can go to a great school, get great grades, and what if you're in a recession? You might not get a good job. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just the reality. And so to me, I was like, well, I'm losing passion because I'm killing myself to get these great grades or whatever and do all the things everybody else wants me to do. And so I kind of pivoted about a year ago and I was like, what do I want to do? What am I happy with?
Yeah.
And, I did so many internships and, I decided on like the best one, the one I enjoyed the most. But I think like like I said, I think working for myself is my ultimate goal. And so I mean, I'm working towards that. And, a lot of people are not happy about that, not like not happy about that, but concerned about that because it is scary. It is a risk, right? And so I understand that. But I think the best thing I've ever done for myself is take a step back from literally everything everybody else was telling me and just think about where am I happy? Who do I want to surround myself? Where do I want to live? And what's my passion and what do I want to accomplish for the world? And I think that's something I've been really trying to develop in myself this past year.
So if anybody wants to tune in to Corporate Crash Out, they want to reach out, any of the other good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
So you can go to my Instagram and I have my links all there. So you can buy Corporate Crash Out merch or go see our Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts as well or YouTube. So lots of different platforms, but you can check that out there.
Okay, excellent. I will put all these notes in the show notes. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. I love talking and feeling that energy of this generation that really wants to kind of grab their future and take control. So best of luck with everything. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much. Thank you, Joe, for
Yeah,
having me.
you bet. Thank you.